The Arsenal of Awe, How American Captivity Broke the Nazi Mind. The pencil trembled in the dim light. On June 4, 1943, hidden within a rolling train car, a German soldier wrote in his secret diary, "The Americans must be lying to us," he scrawled. No nation could possess such abundance while fighting a war on two fronts. Outside his window, the Texas plains of Mexia blazed with electric light. It was 10 p.m., and every farmhouse and street corner was illuminated. This spectacle shattered 3 years of Nazi propaganda. In Germany, blackout regulations had plunged the Reich into darkness since 1940. Yet here, in what Nazi rhetoric called a decadent nation, electricity flowed like water. This was the first shock for 1,850 veterans of Rommel's Afrika Korps. They stepped onto the platform from cushioned Pullman coaches, not cattle cars. The entire population of Mexia had turned out to witness their arrival. But none of them knew this moment would trigger a profound psychological demolition. It was a dismantling of Nazi ideology not with battle plans, but with production statistics. This crushing display of industrial capacity would shatter every assumption these soldiers carried. It would change their view of their enemies, their homeland, and their cause forever. The collapse of their world had begun weeks earlier in Tunisia. On May 13, 1943, in the scorching hills of Tunisia, General Jürgen von Arnim surrendered. He was Rommel's replacement. Along with him, 250,000 German and Italian soldiers laid down their arms. The Wehrmacht's most experienced desert fighters were now prisoners. These were the men who had driven the British back to Egypt. Among them was Hauptmann Friedrich Radlmayr, a holder of the Iron Cross. His diary, discovered decades later, provides a harrowing account. It details the psychological impact of American captivity on the German soldier. The re-education began not in a classroom, but in the port of Oran, Algeria. As Radlmayr and 30,000 other prisoners waited for transport, American efficiency began its work. It started cracking their deeply held preconceptions. The U.S. Army processed thousands of men daily with stunning precision. This organizational skill eclipsed anything the Wehrmacht had achieved. Identity cards were photographed and filed. Medical examinations were completed efficiently. Geneva Convention rights were explained in fluent German. But the first true blow to their reality was something simpler: the food. Obergefreiter Hans Müller was captured with the 21st Panzer Division. He later wrote to his mother about the experience. "In the cage at Oran, the Americans fed us better than we had eaten in 6 months." He described having white bread, real coffee, and meat twice a day. They believed it was a trick, a performance put on to impress them. They didn't realize this was the standard American military ration. The Liberty ships that carried them across the Atlantic were the next lesson. These vessels were themselves monuments to a terrifying new kind of power. The SS Robert E. Peary was built in a mind-bending 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. These ships were produced at a rate of 3 per day at the peak. They were returning from delivering supplies to the European theater. Now they carried a different cargo, up to 30,000 POWs per month by the summer of 1943. The 2-week Atlantic crossing provided the second stage of their ideological unmaking. Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann of the 90th Light Division kept a detailed account. He noted that the ship's crew discarded more food waste each day than his entire company received in weekly rations during the final months in Africa. He watched American sailors jettison half-eaten steaks and whole loaves of bread. They threw out gallons of milk that had simply soured. They did this openly, without a second thought, and not to mock the prisoners. To the Americans, this waste was meaningless. Their supply was simply infinite. The ships became floating seminars in American industrial supremacy. The prisoners learned their vessel was one of 2,710 Liberty ships. Each ship required 250,000 parts assembled from components made in 32 states. The scale was incomprehensible. Oberstleutnant Wilhelm von Steuben came from an aristocratic Prussian family. His family had served in every German war since Frederick the Great. He later wrote in his memoirs about a key moment. As they approached the American coast, he watched the radar antenna on the bridge. This technology, which Germans believed only they possessed, was standard on a cargo vessel. It was then he first suspected the truth. Germany had already lost the war. On August 2, 1943, the site of the Norfolk Naval Base in Virginia atomized the last remnants of Nazi propaganda. The base sprawled across 4,300 acres. Its docks stretched for miles. Its cranes loaded dozens of ships in a synchronized ballet of logistics. In a single day, this one port handled more tonnage than all of Hamburg managed in a week. Gefreiter Johann Weber, a factory worker from the Ruhr, counted 47 cargo ships. The prisoners marched past parking lots choked with civilian automobiles. These cars belonged to dock workers. In Germany, the promised people's car remained a propaganda dream. Here, ordinary laborers drove to work, but the final surreal touch was the train itself. It was not the infamous 40 and 8 boxcars. They were given full passenger coaches, Pullman cars with padded seats converted to sleeping berths. Dining cars had white tablecloths. Observation cars had panoramic windows. "We boarded like tourists, not prisoners," Radlmayer wrote. The American guard seemed almost embarrassed by the comfort. One sergeant apologized that the air conditioning wasn't working properly. Air conditioning. The prisoners believed such luxury existed only on Hitler's personal train. The 3-day journey from Norfolk to the camps of Texas became a rolling autopsy of the Nazi worldview. As the trains plunged through America, the prisoners pressed against the glass. They witnessed an impossible reality. Every small town blazed with light. Towns like Martinsville, Danville, and Greensboro glowed with illuminated shop windows. Houses had lights burning in multiple rooms. In Germany, these places would have been bathed in darkness. In Roanoke, Virginia, the train stopped for water and coal. The prisoners watched American railway workers accomplish in 30 minutes what would have taken 2 hours in Germany. They used automated coal loaders and electric water pumps. Mechanized lubrication systems testified to a vast technological chasm. The workers wore leather boots that would have cost a German laborer 2 months' wages. They drank Coca-Cola and smoked cigarettes continuously. They stubbed them out half-finished. Feldwebel Hinrich Müller was an electrical engineer from Siemens. He wrote, "They left lights burning in empty buildings. Electric fans ran in vacant rooms. It was the carelessness of infinite resource. The waste was magnificent." As the trains carved through Tennessee and Kentucky, they passed factories that dwarfed anything in Germany. The Alcoa aluminum plant consumed 175,000 kilowatts of power. This was more than the entire city of Munich. Near Louisville, they passed the Rubber Town complex. These were 4 massive synthetic rubber plants. They had sprung from empty fields in just 18 months. They produced 800,000 tons of rubber annually. Germany, despite inventing the process, had never managed more than 120,000 tons. Then came Detroit and the Willow Run plant. This single factory was built in only 9 months. It produced a B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. Hauptmann Verli was a Luftwaffe pilot shot down over Tunisia. He pressed his face to the window. "I counted 17 B-24s in various stages of assembly," he wrote. They had been told American planes were inferior. They were told the planes would fall apart in combat, but he could see the precision and the quality. These were not inferior aircraft. They were simply built faster than the Germans could conceive. The journey was a relentless onslaught of scale. In St. Louis, they crossed the Mississippi on the Eads Bridge. Below them, barges carried more grain than Germany's entire 1942 harvest. In Kansas City, the air itself was thick with the smell of slaughter. Stockyards held tens of thousands of cattle. German POWs had subsisted on 200 grams of meat per week. They watched American workers eat beef sandwiches during lunch. "They ate meat like we ate bread," wrote Gefreiter Paul Fischer. No, they ate meat like we wished we could eat bread. Their destination, Camp Hearn, was the final blow. It was built in just 4 months. It housed thousands in wooden barracks with electric lights and flush toilets. There were hot showers. These conditions exceeded what most had known as civilians. The camp hospital was better equipped than German civilian institutions. Oberstabsarzt Dr. Friedrich Bauer was chief surgeon of the 164th Light Division. He found X-ray machines and advanced surgical equipment. He found pharmaceuticals unavailable in Germany since 1941. They had penicillin, he would later testify. This miracle drug we had only heard rumors of. They used it freely, even on prisoners with minor infections. The camp kitchen was a temple of abundance. It had walk-in refrigerators and gas ranges that could feed 5,000 men. The daily ration included fresh milk, eggs, and meat. Feldwebel Otto Krebs was a former hotel chef from Munich. He wrote in despair, "Today, we threw away more food than my family has seen in 3 years. It was not spoiled food, it was simply excess. I wept as I threw perfectly good bread into the garbage." By the following year, the American labor shortage led to POWs working in fields and factories. This was where the final deconstruction of their beliefs took place. They saw farmers with electricity, running water, and tractors. They worked beside automated cotton gins and combine harvesters. These machines could do the work of 100 men. They witnessed the endless American heartland. Fields stretched to the horizon. Farmers spoke casually of yields that were pure fantasy in Germany. The most profound shock, however, was not material. It was moral. At Christmas in 1943, American churches and civic groups sent 500,000 packages. These gifts were for the German POWs, their enemies. These were men who had been trying to kill their sons months before. The prisoners were served a feast of turkey, ham, and pies. Local choirs sang Christmas carols in German. Oberleutnant Walter Müller's brother had died in the bombing of Hamburg. He wrote, "They know we are their enemies. Many have sons and husbands fighting against our armies, yet they show us Christian charity. What kind of people treat enemies this way?" He concluded it was the act of a people absolutely certain of victory. It was the confidence of a nation secure in its power. This exposure to American abundance and humanity had a name. Intelligence officers called it ideological collapse syndrome. Prisoners who had arrived as fanatical Nazis now requested books on democracy. They enrolled in university correspondence courses. They watched Hollywood films that showed America's problems. Lieutenant Joseph Kramer wrote about the American honesty. "They hide nothing," he observed. "This honesty makes them stronger, not weaker." In Germany, such criticism would mean death. Here it is considered patriotic. When news of the D-Day invasion reached the camps, it was the final verdict. Newsreels showed the colossal, unimaginable armada. Obergefreiter Friedrich von Toben wrote, "We knew then that everything was lost. It was not just the war, but the entire Nazi project." He saw that they had challenged the world's greatest industrial power. They had fought with fairy tales and racial mythology. They had sent horses against trucks. They had matched courage against unlimited resources. By war's end, 371,683 German POWs had been held in America. Fewer than 1% attempted escape. Post-war surveys showed 95% rated their treatment as good or excellent. They returned to a destroyed Germany not as broken men, but as witnesses. They had seen the arsenal of democracy. They carried back the blueprint for its principles. Hans Kroll was a prisoner at Camp Shelby. He later became West Germany's ambassador to the United States. Walter Hallstein taught classes while in a camp. He became president of the European Commission. They were the vanguard of a transformed Germany. The nation would rise from ashes on a new foundation. It was not built on conquest, but on lessons learned in captivity. They learned that prosperity springs from freedom, not tyranny. They saw that strength flows from creation, not destruction. Their story is one of history's most remarkable redemptions. It proves that the most powerful weapon is not the capacity to destroy. It is the overwhelming evidence of what free people can build. The German soldiers came as conquerors. They were defeated not just by armies, but by the sheer force of a simple reality. They were defeated by a light left on in an empty room. They were humbled by a half-eaten steak thrown in the trash. They were converted by the quiet, confident humanity of a people. It was the humanity of a people who had nothing to prove and everything to give.